Hey everyone, it's Rye. Gonna be bringing you a more ramble style video. Um, I don't think I've made one of these in a while, so I hope this is kind of refreshing. I might do a couple more like this, but this is an idea I've thought about for a long time, and I finally kind of have, fleshed out enough of an idea to present it almost in a interesting way. So I'm curious to see what all of your opinions are. And I'd love um, to just kind of see where we go from here. But this is going to be talking about Coast. I think a lot of people would agree that Coast is not in a very healthy spot right now. Oftentimes, you're kind of begging people in lobbies to play Coast because it's so much weaker than the other trees. And overall, like that's not a good position you want to be in ever. Um, and I think allowing people to get more variance in their lobbies, no one's going to have to settle to play Coast kind of thing, is always going to be kind of interesting. So let's talk about Coast generally and some solutions I have. So let's talk about what the good things about Coast are. So Coast is known for really strong scaling. Most people like playing Coast because it's usually a pretty chill game. I feel like this isn't a feeling, this is more so a fact, but um, Coast often feels the role of the sim player. If the inland players are the people that are just kind of killing each other, the coastal players are the ones that are kind of just chilling. And they're going to scale up pretty hard. They're going to have really slow games in the beginning, but it scales up pretty nice. Lighthouses are some of the best buildings in the entire game. Explo is probably everyone's favorite tree. Like, it's just such a fun tree to fill out. It feels very rewarding to fill out all the way. There's a lot of cool units on the coast: carriers, nuclear submarines. Uh, I like ironclads a lot. They're all like pretty cool units. Um, High GPT scaling. This is more of a byproduct of like having a coastal cap. Um, you're just trade routes and sending cargoes. They just send a lot higher gold yield than an inland one. Amphibious attacks in general are not really explored much, but when you pull them off, they're like the coolest thing ever to attack with both unit types to make your opponent kind of have to scramble to defend one of the fronts he wasn't expecting. And then finally, it's a different experience. I think a lot of people click Coast because Coast has a very well defined niche on what it is, and it's not inland. And that's fine. And it's different. It feels different to play Coast than it would to be inland. And that to me is one of the nice things about Coast. And that's the thing that I don't makes me hesitate from releasing something like this, because I think a lot of people really prioritize that feeling and they really like that feeling, and what I'm suggesting might do away with it. But we might be able to, reclaim some of it in future years. But let's talk about the bad. And this is a number of different things, but troll CS spawns, but more broadly, a lack of city settles. Compared to inland, oftentimes coast just doesn't have as many options on where it can settle. Um, CS spawns can be a really big deal on this, but in general, half of your land is water. So unless you're putting them into the water to find islands and stuff like that, which on current patch isn't really an option, um, you kind of you're forced into like a couple cities or not as many cities as an inland player, or you settle inland and feel pretty bad because you're playing a coastal civ, etc. There's low interaction, and I think this is the most important thing of anything on this bad list. Low interaction is the name of the game for Coast. You are not playing the same game as the other players that aren't Coastal. A lot of times it feels like a duel between you and the other Coastal, and then you play the rest of the game as like a big, strong player that just took over another empire. Oftentimes, these low interaction games result into really toxic outcomes. Whereas if you're not stopped, then they're just gonna you're gonna run away with the game later on. This is especially prevalent with like piety commerce builds, which I've been known to do quite a few of, um, where they just get thousands of gold per turn and then buy a bunch of units and go kill the world. Slow starts. Now this is a byproduct of one, coastal luxes in general are weaker by default because they get so good with a lighthouse. So working those tiles in the beginning of the game isn't really an option. So that doesn't help, especially with your gold early on. Not to mention cargoes are so good, but they're substantially more expensive than a caravan. So that slows you down. Um, like I said before, you kind of need a lighthouse. So you're kind of gate kept between scaling by getting your lighthouse online, which can really slow down your early cities. Uh, Maybe to the point where you just forego building a lighthouse completely and you just go granary right into cargo, um, which again feels bad because you're on the coast. You want to be working your coastal tiles. High variance. I mean, if you recall the picture of my thumbnail or what I said where I was showing in the beginning of the game, that was a Gaufat start in tournament. Completely just fucked him over, and that's just kind of how it goes on the coast. Like if you've played this game a good bit, you'll know that a lot of times when you rolling the coast, like you're just gonna get some awful start, and a good coastal start can be amazing, but a bad one is unplayable in a lot of ways. Uh, Islands are very toxic. You know, you talk about that. That's putting like low interaction on a new level, right? And um, there's not a lot of ways to counter it from an inland player sense. If the guy has 10 islands, this was especially prevalent on the last patch or on the last map where islands were really strong. But if the guy settles like 10 islands or something like that, 99% of his hammers are not even accessible by an inland player. So taking that guy out of the game is almost impossible, at least until, you know, at least until you kill another coastal player, get a coastal city, but at that point he's also controlling the waters and stuff like that. So, the only way to really beat him is to get all the other 5 caps right before you take his. It's really tough. One of the most awful feelings about playing Civ in general against a coastal is if knowing in the back of your head, if I settle this coastal, I could get taxed later on by leftover units. And by leftover units, I mean, let's say you're playing coast and there's one other coastal player and you decide I'm going to go frigate this person. So you build some frigates and you build some privateers and you go kill him. And he's dead. Now you have all these privateers that are irrelevant to the rest of the game. They can't do anything to help your game, except take other coastal cities. It's the only thing they're good for. They can't kill land units. They can't shoot land units because, unlike like a battleship or a frigate would be able to, they are just sitting ducks doing nothing. Now, the correct thing in a lot of ways is to take your units that you just use to kill someone, go across the other side of the map and go take all the coastal cities you can, because they're just sitting ducks and they're free text for you to steal. This form of taxing is so incredibly obnoxious to play against, and the way to beat this is to have more people settle coastals. So if you do that, you'll get punished, but no one wants to do that against someone who's got such a large, like all of their hammers on the coast compared to you, who might only have 1 or 2 cities. Recap war. Oh my gosh. Like, this is a personal thing for me, but compared to inland players where, I'm going to go kill this player, and as long as I kill them and I full kill them, like there's not much they can do. The coastal player, the main reason you don't attack a coastal player is because he'll build a bunch of boats and he'll go take his city back until it's at 1 pop. And he'll do that for all of his cities, and then you're just sitting there and you're like, okay, like, what was the point of this? I got nothing. And the whole reason this guy did this was to grief the game, so that next time when I play with him, I'll think twice about attacking him. Easily abused. This is kind of just a dynamic of the earlier parts where you use slow starts, you have really high variance, so sometimes your land is going to be awful. Um, if someone comes at crossbows, you're probably gonna die. Uh, and not to mention that, I think one other thing that's fundamental about Coast in general is you just don't have as many tiles to hold your cities from, right? A lot of the times you can heal units behind your city if you're inland. You can't do that if you're coast. There's nothing behind your city. So oftentimes you're hemorrhaging units on the coast because land units because you have nowhere to save them. You have nowhere to retreat them to. Over buff pantheons, this is more of a compensation because coast is so weak in the beginning of the game. You know, you're going to give them God of the Sea or Fishboat Hammers, which are just objectively the strongest pantheons in the whole game. But because they're on the coast, they're not nearly as strong as another pantheon because you only can really take them on the coast. And then similarly, over buff civs. Spain is a perfect example of this. Spain went from a absolute god tier civ, was banned in every single game. No one wanted to play against Spain. Had the best possible game potential, highest high rolls, etc. To now they're on the coast and no one even thinks about playing them. No one, and it's because if you're on the coast, your game is so much worse than your inland that something like Spain, which could objectively have been the best civ in the game, is now an afterthought in most people's minds. So all of these all of these points bundle up to really not a toxic or not a healthy civ type to have in the game. You're creating these really negative dynamics that make people not really want to play. Most of the time you're begging people to play coastals because current map generation is if you only have one coastal, your game is going to the map's going to be pretty weird. And you don't want to give someone solo coast because then they can just get all the coastal wonders. They can just kind of chill. They can play like an expo lane. And they can just scale really hard. Whatever. They can go completely unchecked, which isn't fun. So what's my solution? My solution is to remove coastal spawns full stop. No more coastal spawns. Right? There's no more coastal regionals. That being said, you can have secondary regionals similar. And I was thinking about this. There's two different ways to have it. You can have it kind of sporadically done, like map currently has with most Luxes, or you can have it in the sense that they spawn in certain regions of the map. Maybe on like I don't know the bottom middle of the map is where coral spawns, or like the east side of the map is where whales spawn for whatever reason, or something like that. And then you can increase the amount of Lux diversity. And you can just have more Luxes that just spawn on the coast. And then this would help fix the CS problem. Like this is a perfect example where if coral is my regional, there's no way in the world I could ever settle this because the only tile I can settle from is on this bison, and I'm not going to settle on bison to get one coral, right? So it helps fix the problem of these CS spawning in like not very helpful places and kind of troll spots. What else do we need to change? Because we can't just stop coastals and then like make it everything better. So what I suggest is we allow lighthouses to be built in all cities if they have a coastal resource in any of their rings at all. Similar to how circuses or stoneworks get allowed to be built. If you have a fish, if you have a coral, you have another type of luxury, of a toll, all of those count towards coastal resources, and that would allow you to build a lighthouse. Explo applies to all cities. This applies, you don't have to be coastal to get the Explo bonuses. Now, I think this might take some adjusting because maybe 2 hammers is too many to give to every single one of your cities, including the inland ones. I don't know. Maybe not. Remember, Lib gives 1 hammer to every city. Would you really want to take Explo to get, 2 hammers and production towards buildings you're not going to build? Maybe. I doubt it. Um, the only one that might need to change is the science, but even then, it might be fine. I don't know. I think it's worth exploring. Fishing boat improvements. So remember, this is the improvement to whales, to pearls, to fish, to anything. The improvement that workboats used to fulfill now give +2 food instead of +1 food. Now, I think that this is a very, and that's mostly on fish, but that would apply to everything. So, your crab tiles become 5 food tiles. Your fish tiles become 6 food tiles with a lighthouse or something like that. Right. I think increasing and then or the alternative is you give 1 food and 1 production, but I think 2 food is a good starting point. Um, I think settling coastal cities as an inland player should, because that's all that there is now, should be highly incentivized, and you should be rewarded for doing so because one, it increases your risk to other outside factors such as people coming at you with naval attacks. But two, it allows you to scale really well. So you want to have some sort of way to get to that scaling where you're not just playing like a worse inland, but now you have some sort of identity. And if you have multiple coastals, now they've become really powerful. If this kind of whole thing got applied to the whole map, you're going to have a lot more people settling coastal, and you're going to have a lot more interaction between people with boats. And, maybe if my Expo attack, I'm going to tech Galeas so I can kill their coastals like easier as well because I have a couple coastals as well. Or maybe my post-unis junk attack, I'm going to make a pit stop for Galeas because no one's going to expect me to also have boats and then just completely shaft them. And even teching there wouldn't be that big of a deal because my coastal cities aren't behind as they are usually just behind. Not to mention, I don't have to worry about people taxing me because I myself am a strong coastal threat, and there's no, insanely strong threat. Now, I think the kicker to all of this is sea resource spawns increase dramatically. I'm talking fish, whales, all the coastal luxes, whatever, atolls. Maybe you add something other than fish. I don't know anything off the top of my head. But you increase the amount of resources that can spawn on the coast by 30 to 40%. Your coastline should be not riddled with, but there should be, every single city should have at least like two or three fish, right? And maybe a lux and maybe an atoll or something like that, right? These cities need to be strong. They need to have something to compete with inland players. They should be incentivized to be settled. We want to increase interaction between everyone, and to do so, we need to reward people for settling them in the first place. Now, I will say, this idea is not fully fleshed out, and I haven't gone through every single civ, but civs would need to be adjusted in accordance to this change. There's 2 types of coastal civs currently. There's ones that would need a buff for having coastal removed. Those are civs that are kind of tailor-made to coast the way it is now. And, they would need to be adjusted because otherwise they'd be really weak. And then there's ones that would need a nerf because they're so overtuned that putting them on the coast has somewhat balanced them. Perfect example is Spain, right? So Spain would need to get changed. So let's go over a couple examples of that. So let's talk about the first example where you need to buff a civ. Denmark. I don't think anything really needs to be that different, but I think fish now should give 2 hammers in conjunction with the 30 to 40% increase on fish spawn and coastal resource spawn. This is now a pretty big deal. You're going to want to settle a lot of coastals as Denmark. These 2 hammers on fish tiles is going to be insane. These tiles are going to be so strong. And everything else can stay the same. If that's not enough, maybe you thematically add something with river movement where, you get like a longship effect for crossing a river or something like that. I don't know. Just spitballing here. But I think having civs that want to be near the coast but aren't coastal bias is fine because that incentivizes them to settle them. The problem is, most of the time when you're settling coastals now, they suck. The only reason you're doing it is for a cargo ship, not really for the resources or not really for the ability to build boats. You're just doing it because you want a cargo, or that's just how your land works best. And then let's talk about the second one, Philippines. Philippines is probably going to be the best civ in the game if they move over to inland the way they are. So how would we change that? It's very simple. Instead of having +1 movement on or +2 movement on civilian units, it's now just +1. So pretty substantial buff, or a pretty substantial nerf, but still workable. And then finally, instead of having your first 2 cities get a citizen, 1 extra citizen, now it's just your first one. And if that's still too strong, just remove that entirely. You still have a civ with a guerrilla, which is absolutely broken. One of the best buildings in the whole game with the National Church. The civ's still really, really strong. And it keeps some of its identity. And I think this kind of concept can be applied to almost every single coastal civ. Where if they're very tailored to playing coastal, right, such as Carthage, maybe you change their harbors so that the harbors are really strong to incentivize, okay, like settling on the coast here is going to be really good. And then they keep their unique lighthouse. Not every civ is going to be able to utilize all of its buildings all the time. Like think of like an Irish pub as Ireland. Most of the time, you're just getting a little cheaper of a zoo. You're not going to get the bonus stuff. But when you get the bonus stuff, it's nice. Or as Armenia, you know, those observatories on like there's a lot of times you just don't get mountains as Armenia, and that's fine. And sometimes that's what happens. Or as Vietnam, and I'm going to talk about Vietnam in a second. You know, you're not always going to have the buildings in all of your cities that you want to have. But when you do have them, they should be really good. This is a perfect example. Oh boy, I'm so excited to play Vietnam. I get nothing. I'm a vanilla civ here. In my cap, and probably in a bunch of my expanse, I'm a completely vanilla civ. I have to go find the land that I'm looking for. That's what coast should be. Also, this took a single try. I was like, I'm gonna re-roll for Vietnam, like to get like just to prove a point, and I didn't even have to. I literally got it the first try. So these kind of things happen all the time. I'm not saying it's gonna feel great every time, but it shouldn't. In free for all, there should be variance between your starts. You shouldn't always be given exactly what you're looking for, what the civ wants. But that's what makes this kind of exciting. This is taken from one of my videos. Many of you have probably seen it. I'm playing Armenia, but I'm going to settle 0 inlands. This becomes not completely terrible. This actually wouldn't be that bad with coastal change. Like imagine if there's more than 4 fish that are settleable. Instead, what if it was like 8 and those fish are better? Now I'm excited to have this start. Now I'm like, oh my God, this is such a high roll. I love being on a peninsula. Like no one would ever think to say that, you know? Like currently peninsulas are death sentences in a lot of ways. But with this start, with those changes I'm recommending, this would be exciting. This would be super, super cool. So to recap, the goal of this change is to increase interactivity. You're going to have 6 players in free-for-all, not 4, and not a 4+2. You're trying to remove toxic gameplay, remove people playing to recap, remove people settling on islands and then going to space without you being able to do anything. You're trying to keep that coastal feel. You want to be able to build boats. You want to be able to send cargo ships. You want to be able to feel like these cities are more chill, and you know me settling the coast is more like away from other people until the boats start showing up. And I think you kind of can get that. Reduce overall variance. No one likes having these super high desert, awful dog shit starts. They're terrible. But maybe with these changes, you're going to get a lot less of that and a lot more normal starts in Lek Mod, which are better. And your games are going to be faster. And coastal players might be even stronger than inland players. Like coastal civs might be even stronger. I don't know. And then finally, I think this creates a lot more unique playstyles. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more amphibious attacks. I think we're going to start seeing maybe like someone with 3 coastal cities kill 2 guys coastal city, other 2 other guys coastal cities across the map just to grief them or something like that. But they could fight back or whatever, or maybe they do an amphibious attack. Like, I think there's a lot of unexplored items with this, and there's other ideas that we could do too. We could have no islands at all. Just remove all the fucking islands. And then make the ocean in between both sides of the Pangea extremely small. So it's more of a world wrap and less of a I'm on one side of the map, he's on the other side of the map, there's nothing we can do. Um, Or you could completely buff islands because now no one's getting a complete coastal feel. I think with this kind of change, you're going to get people settling islands as inland, and it's not going to be bad. I think it'll be kind of cool. I think Liberty is going to have a lot more cities to settle because now coast becomes an option, or islands become an option, and then it's not a complete meme. Overall, I think this would create such a stronger, more exciting way to play Civ where you're not forced to play coastal, where the coastal player isn't out of the fucking game. They're not playing a completely different game than everyone else. You could leave God of the Sea and seafood rituals and everything else the exact same, and people would still take them because the amount of increased sea resources encourage people to settle those coastals now. And finally, this would eliminate people from having slow starts. It would eliminate the problem of people, getting completely generaled in. If you recall from this picture here, the objective correct way to attack a coastal player is to buy into their third or fourth ring and just general into their cap. How do you recap this if you're Soul? You really can't because you got no tiles. So, anyway, that's all I really had to talk about. I would love to hear your opinions in the comments. I know this is a pretty game warping change, and this would dramatically, change the course of how a lot of Civ games go and how people play about Civ. I know a lot of people would hate this, but I know most people would end up liking it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave them in the comments below. I read every message. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.